Thank you, Bill, for the kind introduction. And thank you so much to Keystone Agricultural Producers for the meeting that's being hosted today and for encouraging these types of conversations. I hope you all found value in the panels this morning, and it's a conversation that we're excited to continue on with our panelists today. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Linda Nicol. I'm the Executive Director of Manitoba Association of Watersheds, and I've been working in the agriculture field for a little over 15 years. Through that time, I've developed a deep appreciation for farmers and respect for the work that you do. So when I find myself in a room such as this one, standing at a microphone, hoping to impart some degree of value to you, I feel it's important to start by saying first, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the breakfast I was able to feed my children today, for the lunch that we just enjoyed as a group, and thank you for your continued commitment to the important work of agriculture and how you operate on farm. Since I joined the Watershed District program, I've had the opportunity to really develop an increased understanding of the types of farm programs that are available, and there is no shortage of them. It's one of the strengths, I think, of Watershed District staff that they have an opportunity to help farmers within their districts, learn about the programs available, help them apply to what's best for their farm, and in some cases help them implement the actual projects on farm as well. They take a practical approach to sustainability, and it's one we've heard talked about throughout the morning already. I think it's important to recognize that when we're talking about sustainability and sustainable programming, we understand that it's not just about environmental sustainability, it's about the economic viability of implementing those programs. And so I'm honored today to be joined by three of our panelists. They come from different walks of life, but we're here with one common goal, which is to share a little bit more about the types of programming available to Manitoba farmers that you can use to help implement sustainable practices on your farm. Our process will be to have a bit of an introduction from each of our panelists, and then we've got a series of questions we'll walk through in a very open dialogue. There'll be a lot of back and forth, but also I'd really like to encourage that we make use of the microphones throughout the room, because this is, as a panel, we're here to help you. So if you have questions about programming, we'd love to hear them, and we'll do our utmost to help you understand more. So with that, we'll start with some introductions. I know we've got mics in front, but I'll leave it up to you gentlemen if you want to speak there or come up to the microphone here. You'll find that in our programs, there were fantastic bios provided by each of the panelists. I won't read them word for word, but instead leave it to their own words. We'll start with you, Dr. Tenuta.
Thank you, Linda. Mario Tenuta, University of Manitoba. I recognize many faces here, and it's great to see the students here as well. Our research at the university, at my laboratory, is about BMPs, improving sustainability of agriculture in Manitoba, and particularly that you're probably well aware of about nitrogen, improving nitrogen management with 4R practices and with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And do you want me to continue? Do I have 5 minutes for this?
5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes for this. Okay, about greenhouse gas emissions. So I am, there's a big need out there. There's a big need to relay to you, have discussions with you, and figure out how we navigate the present and the near future in terms of environmental and productivity factors and concerns on farm. As you're aware of, every day it seems we have more and more pressure and interest and needs for environmental sustainability. And you also at the same time have very important economic factors that are affecting your production system, your farm. And there are things that are thrown in geopolitically that have effects of increasing nitrogen fertilizer prices. There's commitments of governments that occur at big fancy global meetings and eventually come back saying that we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a certain amount and so forth like that. So it's a bit confusing. Well, it's not a bit confusing, it's very confusing, and you're kind of wondering why the heck, why can't I just farm? Just leave me alone and farm, that's what I do best. But we're not only just producing food, but we're nurturing soil and the landscape and the environment. That's what we're also doing at the same time. And so we have big responsibilities here. So we try to help you out. And one of the things, my big message is that we can navigate and reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. It's not dire consequences. It's not sky is falling for production, agriculture. You can still be profitable with a mindset towards environmental sustainability in terms of improving environmental sustainability and meet goals and targets for reduced emissions and impacts on the environment. So that's what we do. We have various practices and means to do that, and we're going to continue with more research to do that. So I'll leave it at that, Linda.
Great, thank you so much, Mario. I did say I wouldn't read all of our panelists' bios out loud, but I think it's important to note that in our next panelist, Jared's bio, he uses the most spectacular wordplay in his opening sentence. May I read it to the crowd?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Jared Munro is MASC's Chief Executive Officer. His passion for agriculture sprouted on his family farm near Portage la Prairie and became well-rooted during his time at the University of Manitoba, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness and a certificate in management. And if it was within my power, I would say an award in wordplay. That was a great line.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave it to you, Jared, to introduce yourself further.
Good, thanks, Linda. And you know, really that, it's a challenge to get people to read bios, right? So you gotta make it interesting, but I think it really reflects the passion that I have for this industry. I was just thinking on the drive here, it's shocking to me that I've spent now about half my life working in it. And you know, of course, many years on the farm as a kid before that. But just to give you a bit of background about me, I've been MASC's Chief Executive Officer now for about 5 years, give or take. And before that, have been an employee of the corporation for about 15 years now. So MASC, as most of you know, is a crown corporation in the province of Manitoba that administers both risk management and credit programs to really strengthen and grow Manitoba's ag industry. We're probably most well known for the Agri Insurance Program, which is a multi-peril crop coverage program that's available to Manitoba producers. We have just awesome participation amongst probably, I would say, bar none, the best in Canada. Happens right here in Manitoba. We offer a hail insurance program as well that's completely funded by the premiums that producers pay. And between those two programs this year, we expect to provide almost $7 billion of coverage to Manitoba's agriculture industry, which I think is just, you know, kind of hard to fathom, but that's just the size and reflects really the growth of the industry. We also offer a lot of credit programs, financing, particularly geared towards young farmers. And so we've got a bit of a niche there. We've got some special programming available really to support that generational transfer of assets, which we all know is really important and a looming issue for the industry. Yeah, just on a personal note, you know, I think one of the things that I found most interesting in my career, I started back as an agronomist with, you know, an independent retailer working with producers from, you know, pesticide and fertility recommendations. So I did that for about 5 years, and then had a number of different positions with MASC from, you know, the claims side to doing some program development work, and also as Vice President of Research and Program Development. And I think the thing that really interests me the most is this sort of interplay between policy and the instruments that are used to drive those policy decisions. And so I think we're going to really tap into some of those thoughts later today. So thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Jared. And our final panelist is Wayne Rempel, the President and CEO of Kroeker Farms. Wayne?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wayne Rempel. I've been CEO of Kroeker Farms for just over 20 years, but been in the industry for a lot longer than that. It's been quite a ride. Just to introduce Kroeker Farms to you a little bit, we're basically potato growers and some other vegetables as well. We grow about 6,000 acres of fresh and seed potatoes, all related to fresh in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and recently in Minnesota as well. We have operations in Minnesota, for sales, and of course a farm in Saskatchewan, but majority of our production's in Manitoba. And so I realized not many potato growers here, just to explain what we do a little bit, is that we've really diversified over the years. We used to grow a lot of French fry potatoes, chip potatoes, and we've just focused on fresh potatoes. And so our potato farm is probably divided into 4 categories. A quarter of it is seed, so 1,500 acres of seed potatoes. 1,500 acres of baby potatoes, so little creamer potatoes, which almost 100% get shipped all over the U.S. 1,500 or a quarter of it is organic potatoes, and just a quarter of it is the regular stuff that you buy in the store. And so we're the largest, by far the largest organic potato farm in Canada. We also grow organic onions and hemp and all the other crops as well. We have 6,000 acres of certified organic land, so that we try to make the best of. So imagine what spring is like when you got 6,000 acres of land. You can't spray herbicide, so weeds are growing everywhere, and so you have to really be on top of it. So it's a very interesting, challenging operation. Being a potato farmer, when I grew up, potato farmers are known to cause soil erosion, and wind was blowing. It's always a potato farmer's fault, and so it's always been my passion that we eliminate that, and that we think about conservation. On our farm, we plant 6 to 7 miles of trees every year. We've done this for years already. Really focused on cover crops, and one of my biggest compliments I've had in the last number of years is our farm got the Conservation Award, which is, I think, really unusual for a potato farm to get, but we're very proud of that, and worked hard at it, and we want to continue to talk about conservation, taking care of our soil. We've been, I think we've been pioneers in irrigation water development. Almost everything is from water ponds that we've built over the years, and we began the program many years ago, thanks to some help from the government at the time. 90% of our land is drain tiled, which is an orderly way of no excess runoff, and also 100% of our land is laser leveled, and so it's laser sloped, I should say. It's not level. We have a very minimum slope in Manitoba, especially in the valley here, and so we have to take advantage of that. And so our goal has been that we ensure that we aren't affected by drought because of our irrigation or excessive water through land leveling and tiling. So sadly, we don't use much crop insurance because we've been investing in that side of things. So anyway, so lastly, I wanted to say is that certainly, and Mayor Tenuta talked about it a bit, about the pressure on carbon sequestration and thinking environmentally. It's interesting, I was invited to a meeting of CEOs in Canada just before Christmas, where there was some of the biggest CEOs of Canada, like David McKay from Royal Bank, Galen Weston, Loblaws, and Michael McCain with Maple Leaf Foods organized the event. There is the CEO of Nutrien, McCain Foods, lots of different people, and the goal was how do we solve the carbon credit problem, and how do we deal with that thing? So it's a very interesting thing, and I felt very honored and out of place with a group like that. Next, in 1.5 weeks, I've been invited by Syngenta to attend their World Leaders Conference to talk about the same kinds of things in Switzerland, and where they have 200 of their leaders from across the world are gathering there, and myself and 2 other large farms from across the world are speaking there. A guy from the Ukraine who farms 200,000 hectares of land, and a guy from Brazil who farms a little bit more than that, around 300,000 hectares. So these are massive, massive farms. And so sometimes in the Western Canada, we think that, like, I could easily say our farm, which is, our sales are upwards of 50 million a year, which is big for a farm. But compared to some of those guys, it's massive. So I think sometimes we don't think big enough. So these guys have really, we think we've got it made, or we're really good at technology, where the guys from Brazil are so far ahead of us with technology, it's mind-boggling. The guy from the Ukraine, who farms 200,000 hectares, has 106,000 landlords. And so you can imagine the kinds of problems you have. So it's not like these people don't have problems and struggles, but very interesting kind of group of people to be with. And I've been so proud to be involved in this industry of agriculture. So.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And it's interesting, one of the things you just said right at the end, that how big that operation is, and you can only imagine the size of the problems. And I think that's one of the things that people outside of agriculture don't necessarily always think of, is that the scale up means a scale up of not just returns, but also investments and challenges. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot where a lot of farm-based programming come in, that there's supports available financially to hopefully help alleviate some of that stress and concern. So I have promised Brenna and Colin that we would stay on time. So we've got just under an hour. We'll get started in our conversation, but again, the microphones are open, so if you have any questions, please come on up and join the conversation with us. I'll start, Wayne, if I can direct the question to you first. Everybody can jump in, of course. Do you think there is enough programming available to producers to help them increase their productivity in a sustainable way? Or are there changes to current programs that you think would help in this area?
Yeah, it's maybe I'm not the best person to answer this question, but no, I don't think there is enough programming available. We, as Canadians, from my perspective, I'll just talk about the organic side of things, and so bear with me a little bit if you're not familiar with it, but organic's very difficult because we compete in the world with other organic farmers. The U.S. regulations are way easier on organic production than ours are. Our Canadian PMRA has really handicapped us in a lot of ways, and so, but meanwhile they give the U.S. growers reciprocity. In other words, they can ship into Canada using the Canadian label with totally different rules. And these are the kinds of things that are really frustrating. And I think it's often the Canadian way of doing things. We want to be nice to everybody else, but we don't support our own people. I think, and I don't want to pick on crop insurance, but I feel like some of these things, like you know, if you do your irrigation and tiling and land leveling, some of those things need to be considered when growers are really upping their game that way. The biggest one probably is the struggle is for organic production. I think there's an opportunity for us to do more of that. I'll suggest that I realize people, when I say organic, sometimes I see eyes roll and I can feel it in the room, but the only way to do organic properly is with clean fields. You have to do it right. And so if you'd come to our farm, I think I think maybe some neighbors here would say that they can't tell the difference between our organic field and somebody else's conventional. And that's the way to grow it. And I think it can be done well, but we need some help there. For example, crop insurance for organic is extremely important, and that's the one big thing that we don't have. We don't have a crop insurance program that recognizes the value of that crop and some of those things. I realize it's very complicated to implement that, and it's not an easy solution, but it needs to be done, I think. There's other things that I think are coming. I think in the green new world that we're in, I think we have to be able to sell what we're doing as our farmers. One of the things I talked about is the CEO meeting that we had. There's two options in the world. One is just reducing carbon, and the other one is sequestering it. And the only people in the world pretty much that can do it is farmers. So they really need us to put the carbon back in the ground. Now that's got a lot of complications to it, but I think we need to be supported in that. I think it needs to be sold to the public and in a good way, but I think there's a great opportunity there to be supported.
Great, thank you. I think that cues up a really nice follow-up for you, Mario. But you are here as our resident expert in nitrogen management. I'm wondering what you think about the environmental concerns related to nitrogen and how that will become more important for farmers as they make long-term plans for their operations, and how you think this may affect program design by government.
Well, definitely, nitrogen concerns are going to be more and more part of our planning and management of our farming systems, food production systems. It's just, I don't want to say the word inevitable, but We know that we require lots of nitrogen to produce our healthy crops and high-yielding crops. It requires lots of nitrogen. That's an addition to the ecosystem, and there's going to be ramifications with that, large additions. As we look around the world, we're actually in pretty good shape here in Canada, relatively speaking. Like, we're in situations where, you've probably heard in the media about the Netherlands, where the government is going to buy out 3,000 farms because they are not unable to meet a cap in nitrogen emissions for the Netherlands, which you can understand. Netherlands is quite intensive farming with a lot of importation of feedstuffs for livestock production. And this is the land base is too small to support that immense production of dairy and meat products. We're not going to be in that situation, and I hope our government and our organizations don't ever let us get there. But it's going to be more and more important from the standpoint of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of nitrous oxide. From the standpoint of ammonia, we don't hear too much about ammonia here because we don't have very dense urban populations, but in Fraser Valley, southern Ontario, areas of the Midwest Corn Belt, and then industrialized areas of Europe, ammonia is big issue with that. We also have water quality issues, particularly with groundwater. For example, we have the Delta Aquifer around the Carberry Sandhill area, very important water source for potato production, for example, and also drinking water. So there's a whole bunch of different issues related with nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of those issues that has tentacles that impact many aspects of our living environment. And as we move forward, the management of that nitrogen for food production is going to be more scrutinized. And our technology and sophistication of that nitrogen management is going to be improved and greater to the point where we're going to try to minimize as much as possible the nitrogen losses to the environment. So what I would say is that anybody that's let's say 50 years, 55 years or younger, nitrogen is probably, by the time you retire from farming, you'll be farming for nitrogen management just as important as farming for yield and profitability. It'll be that much of a goal for your farm.
That's a bold prediction, and I think it's one that really speaks to the level of influence that external concerns also have on programs as they're developed, the policy concerns. We think about things like the urban-rural divide and the comments this morning around public trust and how that impacts our programming. And Jared, maybe I'll direct this next question to you, but as it relates to trends that you've seen in your history and your tenure of offering programming through MASC and working directly with producers, can you speak a little bit to some of the trends that you've seen in feedback over the years and how those may relate to the programs as they're developed?
Sure. So I think my first observation thinking back is really how much more professional and organized producers and producer groups have been in proposing changes to programs. And, you know, I think there was a time when, you know, people would come in to meet with our board and it would be really, you know, sort of the issue that they were facing on their own farm. And I think what I'm seeing more is, you know, ideas that are being raised through organizations like CAP. They're being well vetted around the table. The pros and cons are clearly established. And when it comes to us, I think we're really seeing, you know, some very good policy discussions and objectives coming forward to us. I think the other thing, probably the big theme, is really about increasing the responsiveness of programs to what's happening on farms today. And so I think back a few years ago to, producers experiencing, excellent yields on their farms and not seeing that reflected in their insurance coverage. And so there's this perceived gap. And so, with that information, we were able to go back and introduce a yield trending factor into the insurance program to reflect what's going on in real time against some of our historical data. So that's just one example. Another example that we've heard a lot about is, and this is sort of a general theme, I think, of, wanting to see insurance coverage. I'll pick on insurance right for the moment. That's really more tailored to their operations. So, for example, for years, Chuck and others came to the board saying, we've got this next era canola. There's $1 a bushel premium, and it's not being reflected in the insurance coverage. And so we were able to come up with a contract price option that allowed producers to blend the price that they'd contracted for with the insured dollar value to customize that insurance coverage for the upcoming year. And so we opened that up for canola and field peas a few years ago, and have now, really pleased to see the minister announce the expansion of that program to all crops effective 2023. So to me, those are the big trends. I think the other one that's sort of a bit of a divergent trend is to pick up on Wayne's point that there are parts of our agriculture sector that don't have as robust of risk management programs as compared to most annual crops. So, we've been working with Prairie Fruit Growers Association for a number of years on, is there an opportunity to develop risk management programs for strawberry operations, as an example, or fruit tree production or organic production. So it's that's kind of what I would say are some of the trends that we see.
Right, thank you. Did you have something you wanted to? Okay. So I think kind of building on that idea of trends and policy as it affects them, and really to reference Mario's point, are there going to be environmental, strings attached to agriculture programs going forward, like what you referenced in Europe? And if so, how do we make sure that the ability to farm stays relevant within farm programs? I'll maybe direct that one first to Wayne, and we can move down the line.
Well, I think ability, I'm not sure I'll answer the question directly, but I think it's really important as farmers to always think about the marketplace, about the consumer. So we have to stay connected. We can't just say, I grow 100 acres of potatoes because my daddy did that, my granddaddy did before that. You have to, first of all, make sure the market's there and plan for it and adapt to it. One of the things, kind of the buzzwords out there, and we're talking about sustainability, and I think regenerative ag is a big thing. And when I was in Toronto with the group of CEOs, that's what everybody wanted to talk about. And I said, well, one of the things I said was regenerative ag sounds great, and it works really good in the prairies because you can do zero-till soybeans or corn or some of those things, but you use GMO and you put Roundup on. And if you can convince the public that this is a great thing, then it's going to be good for everyone. And then there was a pause in the room, and of course, that isn't going to sell. And so whatever we come up with, we still have to be able to sell to the consumer in the end. And I always say that the further the consumer is from the farm, the farther away from the farm, the more they're interested in organic, in environmental things, and they trust agriculture less, which is sad because I think all conventional production is fantastically safe, but it's the organic side that seems to be the consumer's interest because they're so far from the farm. And I think we've done a poor job of convincing people that, or telling them the story about how good agriculture is generally.
I think for years there's always been lots of discussion about cross-compliance of government programs to meet policy objectives. And so I think we're now starting to see the first crack into that a little bit, to be honest. With the introduction of the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, one of our requirements is actually to conduct a pilot program to identify practices that are both risk-reducing and good for the environment, and try to figure out how we can integrate that kind of practice into the agri-insurance program. it's a challenge, I'll say. I think that in general, agri-insurance across the board has attempted to be management neutral and let farmers make decisions that are best for their operations. But I think we're obviously entering a bit of a different time here. So that's that's the first project. It's also a bit challenging to, in the sense of trying to incentivize behavior. Like, how much do you need to discount a premium rate to incentivize a certain behavior? And if that's successful, how long do you keep incentivizing that behavior? Because in theory, producers are always trying to adopt practices that reduce their risk and increase their profitability. So that is, that's the change that I'm starting to see now.
And before I pass it along to you, Mario, I'd like to just follow up with that, Jared, to ask specifically your thoughts on tying insurance programs to, or the incentives associated perhaps to insurance programs to direct BMPs, and what to do in those situations where there's farms that, for whatever reason, are not implementing certain practices. How are they still able to access the funding?
Yeah, you know what, I'm struggling to wrap my brain around it, to be honest. It's, I think any time that you're trying to implement two policy objectives with one policy instrument, it becomes very confusing. And so I'm not convinced, and we're going to do the pilot project and find out, but I'm not convinced insurance is the best tool to incent behavior. However, you have to recognize as well that that's sort of the biggest pot of money that the government's put forward in the whole Canadian Agriculture Partnership Framework. So it is a lever to incent change. We are going to have to figure out the mechanics of that to see how it'll work.
Thank you. Mario, I'll maybe tweak the question a little bit for you and ask, from your perspective, certainly with, I would imagine, the highest degree of research and understanding of the research associated, what would you say we can do to help shape policy that aligns with leading research and works for farmers to implement? And what, if anything, is the action item that those of us in the room today could potentially take away from this conversation to help manage those changes?
Well, it's kind of a long question that I kind of forget where we started.
That's fair. Shaping policy with leading research and what works for farmers to implement.
Okay, well, that one I can handle.
Go ahead.
We need the research. We need the research here. We need the research on Manitoba farms, Manitoba production systems. We need that sound starting base for research, and knowing what are our options. For example, reducing N2O emissions. Okay, so we started with 4R practices. We explored, I don't know how many 4R practices now, and we have a very good list, a long list actually, of very effective practices. Now those practices now have made their way into incentive programs. For example, like the program that you lead with the Manitoba Association of Watersheds and the Canola Council with the off-calf programs, for example, nitrogen stabilizers, split application of nitrogen, spring application rather than fall application of nitrogen, and so forth. Those practices just don't come out of a hat somewhere, and we don't want them to come out of a hat. We want them to be based on very practical, sound research that is going to be of benefit to you to be able to promote. So we need to continue that investment in these practices and have that information that can be then used to go into these policy incentive programs. Does that answer, someone answer the first one?
Yes, definitely.
Good, okay, now what was the second part there?
The follow-up, because I'm an action-oriented person, so I'm always wondering, from your perspective, is there an action item we can take away to help shape that policy in a meaningful way, to help continue that research and develop the policy? Good.
Well, I think there's two things. One is on the research side, is that sorry, pardon my English, we need to keep advancing and find innovative new ways. So explore those gaps and invest. invest in the R&D and the innovation. I would love to see more innovation here in Manitoba that would be local. Here I'm particularly talking about the large companies, the input companies, the fertilizer chem companies, and so forth like that. I think on the machinery side, we do really good innovation between Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta because we have local machinery manufacturers and so forth. So that's one thing I'd like to see is more investment in the R&D and not just have to look towards Basel, Switzerland, and wherever DuPont Pioneer is in Delaware or something like that. So that's one thing. The other is we need feedback from the users of these programs. So one of the things that I always ask is, well, how is that MAW program of OFCAF? Is it easy? I like to ask people, is it easy?
Oh God, now you're putting me on the spot.
And so, or the Canola Council, maybe let's pick on the Canola Council
No, you
instead.
can pick on us, that's fine.
And so what I hear often is that it's a lot of work for maybe not so much payoff. You know, I need to get a professional agrologist or a CCA involved. I need to develop a management plan first. I need to do this, lots of hoops to go through. And then they say, is it really worth it to go through these hoops? And so one of the things I think we need to keep in mind is get that feedback. Now this is probably a perennial issue with these programs, especially with the government. The government doesn't like bad news spread on the free press and CBC News about money just being tossed around everywhere. So they're, because we hear it all the time, right, with the military and stuff like that. So I don't know what to say there, but sometimes the bureaucrats go a little bit too crazy, and then the programs become less practical and useful, or they become too regimented. Like there's no cookie cutter, as you know, there's no farm that is the example farm. There's no example solid BMPs. I think there's always has to be a little bit of flexibility with production agriculture. So some of our programs need to incorporate some of that flexibility.
No, it's great. I appreciate that answer, and it's one that I take very seriously because, as you mentioned, we are running a program around these beneficial management practices, and we do take that feedback and we bring it forward to the powers that be in the hopes that we can continue to raise the concerns and voices. And I know that our counterparts at Canola Council are doing the exact same thing. So, Wayne, I'd like to direct it towards you when I ask, when it comes to programs, Mario alluded to the fact there can be a calculation made by farmers on the value received versus administrative hassle, and that they would have to deal with. My question is, what aspects of current programs appeal to you as a farmer, and what do you think discourages engagement, and how can industry support?
Good question. I think support could come in ways of education. I think more and more we need to figure things out as far as education is concerned. I love it when the university gets involved in research that also we learn from and get involved with. That's really valuable. I don't know what else there would be. I think there needs to be, like I said before, I think there needs to be more marketing emphasis in the stuff we grow and the way we plan our operations. I think Western Canada has got some great opportunities going forward as far as, you know, climate change isn't going to be good for everyone, but it's going to be, if anybody's going to gain, it's going to be Western Canada. I think there's, I heard a statistic that in the next 20 years, there'll only be 6 agriculture exporting countries in the world, and we are going to be one of them. And so I'm not sure how exact that statistic is, but that's what I heard just recently, so it'd be fun to be a part of that.
Sounds like a good statistic to me, definitely. Yeah. Jared, I wonder what your thoughts are on that balancing act between the verification and requirements of a program versus the administrative hassle and burden to farmers, and what feedback, if any, do you hear regularly about how to best develop programming to support?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to be honest, that's something that we focus on all the time. when we conducted a survey of our clients, I think it was last April or March, the main drivers of satisfaction, no surprise to anybody in this room, are timeliness and accuracy. And so that's really our goal, and is really to try to make it easy for you to do business with us. And it's challenging because we obviously have authorities that we need to be mindful of. We're an organization that's audited by several parties quite regularly, so we need to still make sure that we've got our ducks in a row. But trying to find, exactly as you said, just that balance to making it easy for people to do business with us, with also, respecting some of the authorities, because we are, handling a good chunk of taxpayer dollars.
Certainly. An open question to all of our panelists. How can programs out there help farmers reach their production and sustainability goals? And are there any programs in particular that you would highlight for their hopeful match on that sweet spot of need and administrative ease?
I can start. Maybe not a specific answer to the question, but I think it's important to recognize that having a stable, reliable risk management suite of risk management programs is a critical factor for producers to have the confidence to invest in their operations, to invest in new technology, to have a bit of comfort to be able to experiment and innovate. And so I think that's something that, I often think about is not only, don't get me wrong, the importance of the impact that the programs have on producers is extremely top of mind, but I think we also need to, as an industry, think a little bit about how does that story play out to the broader public? What is the public good of this investment that's being made in farms? And so that's often what I think about is just that confidence to be able to move things forward, to attract value-added processors. Like, without a strong foundation at the primary level, we're never going to be able to accelerate sort of the full value potential of our industry.
Great, thank you. Wayne, Mario, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, as I realize I answered the previous question so poorly, and this kind of ties in. I was trying to think about what affects Western Canada, but in our industry, food safety is such a huge issue. And so we have customers all over North America that we have to accommodate, and so we have got so many different food safety issues or standards we have to meet, and that's one of our biggest challenges. Is we're constantly doing like 6 different food safety issues, environmental sustainability surveys and questionnaires. So getting some of this stuff more standardized would be tremendously a lot easier, and it's such a barrier for entry for any smaller farm. We're big enough that we have administration to get it done, which is not easy, but anybody who's smaller is just, I can imagine it's just so difficult. And I'm not even talking about organic certification, which is really, really complicated. These things are important. Certification is important, but I think streamlining some of the stuff would be just fantastic.
Well, I was looking at what programs are available and thinking about them, and it's not that many in terms of full-fledged different programs. I was coming up with the ALICE program, the OFCAF program, where Manitoba Association of Watersheds, Canola Council are delivering here in Manitoba, Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, and then Ag Action, which we still don't know what are going to be part of that program, part of the new SCAP program, and then it's great to hear about MASC being involved. So in terms of the incentivizing, it's not like there's a huge amount of options, but I can definitely say that there. Let's look at your program. Let's pick on your program, right?
Go for it.
Yeah, let's do it. So let's look at the use of nitrogen stabilizers. So our research, lots of research for a good 12 years, has really shown that they are very effective in reducing losses of ammonia and nitrous oxide to the environment. However, for increasing yield, we're not seeing that. And it's probably because our nitrogen practices, which mimic your nitrogen practices, are pretty decent. And it's not like we're losing so much nitrogen with our practices that we're shorting our crop of nitrogen. And that also could be how we set our rates of nitrogen, that it's to make sure that we don't short our crops. So then what's the real incentive then for going out and buying a product? Okay, well, if you go and buy a polymer-coated product like ESN, maybe there's a convenience factor. You can put a little bit more with the seed, right? It's seed safety. Or maybe you don't have to do split application if you're a potato grower or if you're a grain corn cropper. You don't have to split because you have that later release. So there's that convenience, and you say, okay, well, I'm gonna pay for that convenience with the premium of the extra cost. But for most of us, it's an extra cost. And these programs, like the Association of Watersheds program, will help cover the cost of that premium so that you can make an environmental contribution and improve benefit to the environment without reducing your profits. So to me, that's an ideal program to incentivize. Now, what happens in a few years from now? Well, you know, the thought is that, well, in time, actually, these stabilizer type products are going to be the norm. And they're going to have less urea on the market that the distributors and manufacturers produce and more of the stabilizers. And as it becomes more the norm, then the price should drop, right? That's what we say, right? So that's anyway, so does that help out?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for the very kind plug.
Well, I'll do my best to diss it next time.
Oh, thank you. I'll look forward to it. Oh, wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of some of our planned questions here, but I find it hard to believe that in a room full of farmers there aren't questions or thoughts. Please, sir, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, so Bill McVicker, District 4. So I just thought it'd be interesting if we had Jared and Linda arm wrestle over who's going to pay for the improvement of our drainage infrastructure. And could the argument be made that the Ag Services Corporation already paid for the losses, but if they take that money and put it into drainage infrastructure, we might have less.
I mean, I'm not going to arm wrestle on that one because I kind of agree, but I'll let you take that, Jared.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's not within our scope. We can't do that, but certainly we're always looking for, you know, what are those opportunities to reduce risk? And so, you know, Wayne mentioned tile drainage. Well, you know, that's something we struggle with, to be honest, to recognize as an example. There are clear benefits for some perils. We're a multi-peril insurance company, so it definitely helps with water management. Doesn't maybe necessarily help you with frost, as an example. So it's really, again, about trying to figure out ways to accelerate kind of those on-farm experiences into what your coverage is, what you pay for, and that sort of thing. So unfortunately, probably not, you know, I don't think there's a silver bullet when we're looking at municipal drainage and that sort of thing, because you know, you could argue too that's limiting some of the tile drainage work as well, because you know, you get the bathtub effect. So it's that's a bit of a challenge, but that's the best I think that I can offer is really about trying to figure out ways to be more responsive to the realities on the ground.
And if I can add to that, I would just note that there are programs available through watershed districts as well, such as managed by MHHC, the Growing Outcomes in Watersheds, Grow Trust. And there is, depending on your area and what your needs are, potentially funding available for tile drainage support, things like that. But as far as a broad drainage infrastructure, I certainly don't have an answer to that off the top, but I recognize the issue certainly. Do you have a follow-up for me? You look like you got something to say. No?
I was waiting for you to ask. No, it was the other side of it was I was wondering if you're actually as a strategy for limiting lake nutrient loading, is whether you're strategically using cattails as a throttling filtration device.
Again, those are types of programming when you get into water retention and hotspot areas to prevent nutrient loading. There is funding available through the GROW program at the watershed districts for that. So I'd strongly encourage, if you have concerns in those areas, to reach out to your local watershed district because there may be funding available or options available to help support that. Chuck, I believe you were next, and then Jill.
I want to thank Mario for his comments there. I mean, I've been saying this for a number of years now. Like, if government and society want farmers to, contribute towards reducing the impact of climate change by sequestering carbon, we're providing a service to society. So farmers should be paid for that service just like, a teacher's paid for his service, or mechanic, or anybody else is. And I think the off-camp program is a good start. It at least recognizes that if government wants farmers to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, it's coming at a cost that we can't get back from the marketplace. So hopefully we'll continue this off-cap program until at least, like as you said, products like ESN come down in price so that it's at or below what current urea prices are. So first off, thank you for that. It supports a lot of the comments I've been making over years. But, as it's going to be interesting to see which works better. Is it going to be offset programs where government provides some kind of payment to farmers for providing these services? Or whether it's going to be incentive programs like MASC is talking about, and it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how that works, Jared, because, what you're talking about, like you say, it may work some years, but I'm not sure it would work every year, because on farming, every year is different. And the management changes so much depending upon the planting season. For example, like this year, I had all sorts of intentions to grow this crop and this crop, and I had my fertilizer put on the fields, and then all of a sudden, it's too wet. I can't get out into that field to seed my corn before the deadline. So all of a sudden, the corn goes out and canola goes in, even though maybe I had canola on there 2 years ago, so it kind of wrecks my rotation for a year or two. So it's a really fine line when you start getting into programs that affect a lot of your management decisions, such as seeding. But anyways, I'm very hopeful that as we move forward, government's going to recognize that farmers are one of the only groups that can sequester carbon in the soils, and going to recognize that we're providing a service to society and that we have to be rewarded in some way for doing that type of work. So just some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Did anyone have any follow-up comments to that?
I just want to point out something. I completely agree with Chuck there. The government has to be careful a little bit, though, in terms of make sure it's an incentivizing rather than a payout. I've seen around the world where the government wants certain practice or wants to cause change, and they just do basically like a payout. And then the growers are seeking it just for the money, and it's not part of their operation, competitiveness. Like Europe is a good example, where there's just too many targets. You need to meet this, and then we'll give you this money, and goes on and on like that. And whereas it stops becoming production efficiency as the driver. So we need, yes, these programs, but we need to do it, I think, in a way that drives innovation and competitiveness still to keep us sharp.
Thank you. Coming up to our time, so I believe this will be our last question, which seems fitting for the new president of CAP to have the floor.
Oh, a lot of pressure there. It actually is on the communication side. You mentioned programming that's available specifically through the GROW program with the watershed districts, conservation districts rather. And my question relates to what happens if you're in an area or an RM that doesn't participate, and some of the guidelines and barriers for access to programming if you don't fit into the mold. and which leads to, I guess, better communication of programming. I'm hoping that CAP can play a part in that and getting the information to producers, because you have mentioned numerous times as to the programming that is available, but a lot of times producers don't have access, or they're busy in their other daily operations to recognize programming, and then deadlines are passed, and then all of a sudden you don't qualify. So the first thing is what happens if you don't qualify, or what are because some of the tools that are available through you for specifically reduction in nitrogen, nitrous oxide emissions are specific to if you're in that area, and so you won't qualify. And what other options do producers have if they want to or are using those products or want to innovate, and where to get that programming? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and my apologies to our panelists, because I said one last question and now it's been directed straightly to me. So I'll start, but we can perhaps bridge out. First of all, I want to thank you for the question, because I think it's a really important one. And certainly the Watershed District program in Manitoba is built on jurisdictional boundaries. It is a provincially legislated program built on partnerships with municipalities and the province. And so it covers about 95% of Agro-Manitoba. The province has been committed the last several years to see expansion of that. We've seen several new municipalities join, which is fantastic. But there are still some that are outside. And to your point, that is a barrier to be able to take part in, whether it's MAW's version of the off-cap program, which we call the Prairie Watersheds Climate Program, or whether it's GROW, the program that I mentioned to your question earlier. And as far as what farmers can do for that is speak to your local council. There is opportunity to join the program, and it's the type of funding that is available through off-cap specifically. There's a lot of funds in a short period of time, and we are leveraging the watershed districts to move those funds, because that is what we as an association are here to do, is represent those watershed districts. But programs like GROW, Growing Outcomes in Watersheds, that's a result of a provincial investment into a trust that is available in perpetuity. That funding isn't going anywhere. And so when you join the Watershed District program, there is opportunity to access funding specifically available through watershed districts to benefit ratepayers in the area. So as far as what you can do if you're not currently a part of the program, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your local councils, reach out to the watershed district offices that would be your watershed district to learn more about the programs available. Reach out to me. I'm always happy to have a conversation, but ultimately it starts at the municipal level to express that interest to the province. The second part of your question, because I'm trying to make sure I cover it all, was about communications. And as soon as you asked it, I don't know if you noticed, but I had a quick glance over at Jim Fisher, because the number of conversations we've had around communications are countless. And we're very encouraged that there's momentum right now from within the watershed districts and partners like Delta Waterfowl, MHHC, and the province of Manitoba to really up the communications around GROW. And so that's something specifically that we are absolutely dedicated to. We have resources. We've recently hired a communications coordinator at MAW specifically to help support increasing understanding of the programming that's available through watershed districts. And I am hopeful that if I am ever invited back to a meeting such as this, perhaps next year, there'd be a greater understanding of those programs available, because we are looking at a dedicated communication strategy to that. And to your point of CAP's involvement, I look forward to that as well, because I think there's a real opportunity for leveraging these industry association relationships to help get that information out in a very meaningful way without it having, a massive administrative burden associated to it as well. So speaking to the barriers that are specific to watershed districts and GROW, that's what I would say to answer your questions. But I'll open it up to our panelists in a general sense. When we think about communications and awareness of program availability, what are your thoughts on how we can get that information out most effectively so that farmers understand what's there and how to access it?
I can start a little bit on this one. This is a constant challenge for our organization as well. We're always, you know, we've got a lot of information to share, and it's trying to share the right amount at the right time to the right people. And so I would say that we continually look for opportunities to work with groups like CAP, and I think we, you know, have shown that we can successfully do that over the last few years to really leverage the existing communication channels that you have. You know, MFGA is another group that we've worked a lot with, and making sure that our information is included in some of the mail-outs and whatnot that they do. So it's a job that's never done. You can always do a better job of communicating, and I think the importance of using partnerships with groups like these is of absolute importance.
Thanks. Wayne, did you have anything to add?
No, it's good.
Mario?
On the communication side, yes. So I'm a research scientist, but I get drawn in on the communication side. In this case, in terms of these programs, our research has kind of been, in some cases, the impetus for the programs, and then it goes off into the hallways and bureaucracy of the government, and then it may come back to you in your organizations, and then there's a call out of these programs, and then all of a sudden I get barraged with questions about the programs, and it's like, whoa, a lot's happened, and then some of the programs there's a little bit of some mislogic. For example, with nitrogen stabilizers, if you use a dual inhibitor product like Super U with urease and nitrification inhibitor, you can get off-CAF funding for, but if you use a single inhibitor such as a nitrification inhibitor, you cannot get funding for. I believe that's still the case, and it doesn't make any sense because the nitrification inhibitor is the reason why the N2O goes down, and that's why the Super U is effective in reducing N2O emissions. But, you know, I go back, you know, the Canola Council come back to me and say, help us out, and I say, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. I go to the government saying,
I bug Mario a lot these days,
here's
just
our
in case anyone's
research,
wondering.
you know, there's a little bit of a flaw here, you know, just change it, you know, and you'll get a lot more uptake by farmers, and then the government says, no, and they're going to be waiting next year. They'll change it eventually because it makes no sense, but they're rolling out the program. So the communication side, I think that process of these programs, there's a little bit of information that gets lost in translation, and it's because the people that have that supporting information of why those practices, BMPs, are useful are not continually throughout the process. So, and I realize it's not the communication that you were asking about.
No, that's fine.
But I think I see this very often now. And maybe it's because, you know, scientists are busy and don't do as much outreach maybe as we should, and become involved in that aiding the policymakers.
I think that's a great comment to close the discussion on. And what I like about it so much is that it really brings us back to the first discussion that Brenna moderated this morning about public trust. It's about that understanding and implementation of information in a way that's meaningful to the consumer, and whether that's food being healthy for the person in the grocery store, or whether that is research available to our policymakers to help them make informed decisions about programming. We need to continue to work on that communication in a collective way to bring forward best practices, to share the insights that come directly from your farms and from research facilities, so that the programs available are hopefully successful in their intended goal to support the work that you do. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Wayne, Jared, and Mario. And again, I'd like to thank Keystone Agriculture Producers for the invitation to join you today and for the opportunity to have this discussion. Thank you so much.